Jonathan Levan, and I'm a diver, naturalist. And I guess what I wanted to talk about, among other things, is the fact that I'm probably the only person here who is not representing a school of higher education, an institution of higher education. And I guess my point in that is that it's great to get an undergraduate degree in something, science or whatever, master's degree, PhD. If that's what you want to do, it's fantastic, but it's not something you have to do. I do not have a degree in science. I have a degree in something else. And everything that I've learned about zoology, biology, photography, I have self-taught. I've learned through reading, experience, etc. And so there's a lot of ways that you can have an effective, you can really, when it comes to conservation and ecology and environmentalism, there's a lot of ways that you can have a positive effect. And that doesn't necessarily necessitate you having a degree in science. There are a lot of people out there doing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of citizen science going on right now. And I'm a citizen scientist, and a lot of people that I work with are citizen scientists. So if you feel like you don't want to go that route, or you don't simply have the money for the education, that doesn't mean that you can't have a positive effect. You certainly can have a positive effect, because everything that everybody does every day to help to protect our environment and ultimately ourselves counts for something. So anyway, I started as an underwater photographer. I also do topside photography. I learned to scuba dive when I was in my early 20s, and I've been snorkeling around since probably I was 6 years old. Always been completely fascinated with animals. All of the animals that you see here represented in this picture, I have taken a picture of. These are all my photographs. And this is me. Yes, that in fact, in the upper left-hand corner is a picture of me taking a photograph of a crocodile. And we'll talk more about that later. So I have to say that, I don't necessarily always make a lot of money, but I have a great time. And I affect kids in a positive way. And that makes me very happy, because the next generation is the generation that is going to hopefully get us on the right track to making a better planet for us and for all the wonderful animals that live on it. So I'm just going to show you, this is just going to be fun, really. I'm just going to show you a bunch of different photographs and talk a little bit about each of the animals, because I know a lot about all of the different animals. So this is a rock beauty, and a rock beauty is a kind of angelfish. They live in the Caribbean. This was taken in Cozumel, Mexico. You know it's an angelfish because all angelfish, unlike other fish of this shape, have a spine on their gill cover. This was one of the very first pictures that I took underwater with kind of a high-end camera, where I said to myself, hey, this is something that I feel like I could do. And I'd always wanted to be able to share with other people who don't scuba dive what it is that I'm looking at and how beautiful it is. And, the photos, in a way, they pale in comparison, but at least you're showing people and keeping them interested. I mean, that is the key. If you can get people to invest in the natural world, because we're a part of the natural world, and a lot of us have pushed that away. If you can get people to invest in that, if you can get them to personify these animals, you see the way this fish is looking at you. It looks like he's communicating. I mean, he looks like he has a smile on his face and he's inquisitive and curious. And that may or may not be true. But the fact is, someone who knows nothing about what is under the water looks at this and is enamored of it. And hopefully that makes a connection that they haven't had before. All right, so this is a whale shark. This is the largest fish in the ocean. And it is a shark. Now, sharks do not have skeletons the way we have skeletons. All of their bones are made out of cartilage, which is the same as your nose and your ears. So they're very flexible. They can move very quickly. Whale sharks don't move that quickly, but I'll tell you, they move more quickly than you do. You'd be surprised when you hop in and you're trying to get a picture. If they're moving, they're gone long before you, and they don't even notice you. Because, of course, they're filter feeders. You can see this animal is pulling in hundreds of gallons of water and straining out little crustaceans like krill, and that's solely how it feeds. And it's just, again, an experience like that, and you don't even have to know how to scuba dive. However, for those of you going into marine science, you should know how to scuba dive because otherwise you're not really truly in your field. But to swim with whale sharks, I do this about every year. I go out on a liveaboard boat in the Sea of Cortez, northern Sea of Cortez, and there's a town called Bahia de los Angeles, and we go snorkeling with the whale sharks. They're almost always there feeding. So anybody who's comfortable in the water can swim with these incredible animals. And so we go from the very, very large to the very, very small. Now, this is a Bragabant's pygmy seahorse. This animal is probably about a centimeter or two. Um, Seahorse are, of course, fish, so you might not think they're fish because they have a head of a horse. They have like little fairy wings as their only fins. They have a prehensile tail like a monkey and other animals. It's the only fish with a prehensile tail, so they can hang on to things because they're not very good at swimming. So you've noticed that this animal has evolved to look exactly like the Gargonian, which is another kind of animal, a kind of coral that it lives on. And so it's not easy to find. And it's even harder to take a picture of because we can only spend a very short time there because they don't like a lot of bright light. And they start turning almost immediately upon being found. And so seahorses are one of the more fascinating fish in the ocean because, of course, they're the only animal on the planet where the male of the species gives birth to the babies. The female will put the eggs into the male, he'll fertilize them, and he'll hang onto them. And then when they are ready to come out, he starts pumping his little body, and literally hundreds and hundreds of little babies will come, perfectly formed little babies will come out. And this picture happened to be a picture of the week in Nature's Best Photography. So I submit fairly frequently to different organizations, and I've had some luck having my photos in different periodicals and magazines, etc. All right, so let's talk about sharks. We've seen one shark. This is another shark. This is what people think of as a shark because it looks scary. Well, again, I'm sure most of you know if you're into the oceans at all that that's very much a misnomer. Sharks have really gotten a bad rap. As a general rule, they do not, when they do attack people, which is maybe 12 people a year, they do it strictly by accident. They look up, they see the silhouette of a seal or a turtle, at least that's what they think it is. And the only way they can figure out if it's something good to eat is to go up and make a test bite. Now, a test bite for you and me is a problem because we're very soft and squishy. And so obviously the person could be fatally injured. But the simple fact of the matter is we kill hundreds of thousands of sharks every year for stupid things like shark fin soup. They're apex predators. They're very important to the balance of nature in the ocean. And the more of them that we take out, the more things are going to be imbalanced. And we have no idea when the tipping point is. I mean, between climate change and the problems with plastics and everything else that the 7.9 billion of us are putting onto the planet, we really have to make an effort. And I know that sometimes it feels overwhelming, but again, as I said, if you do something, try to do something every day, even if it's just being kind to another person, it all matters in the long run. And so sharks, of course, will, they're like any animal. They want to get the easiest meal possible. So that's part of why they're good for the health of the ocean because they're probably going to eat something that's injured or sick before they're going to have to chase after something healthy, and that way the weaker animals that might have disease that might pass on to other animals, they get eaten by the sharks, and so the ocean is healthier. And sharks are, they're not eating machines. They're very smart, they're very inquisitive. Like you heard terms like shark infested waters. Well, sharks can't infest waters because they live there. That's like you infesting your own living room. I mean, that statement just doesn't make sense. And there's lots of things like that. But the simple fact of the matter is most sharks are small and bottom dwelling, and really a very small number of sharks are the ones that swim around in the ocean. The ones that swim around in the ocean give birth to live babies, and then a lot of the ones that live on the bottom lay eggs. So there's not a lot of species, not a lot of groups of animals where they either give birth to live young or lay eggs. It's usually one or the other. So that's another interesting fact about sharks. So here's a crocodile. This is an American crocodile, American saltwater crocodile. And people ask me frequently, weren't you scared? And the simple fact of the matter is with the sharks and with the crocodile, excuse me, I was not scared. And that's because we knew exactly what we were doing. We were ready for every contingency. And again, the key particularly when scuba diving in any situation. If you get into a situation where you have a problem, you have to stop, think, and act. Because if you panic, you're done. And if you act like prey in front of a crocodile, you're done. So as long as you stay calm, then you can stay in front of that animal as long as you want. You saw that picture. I was right in front of him. And then when I want him to move along, I would just tap him with my camera and nine to the dome port of my camera. 9 times out of 10, he would just walk off because they're so old, their instincts are so old, they're programmed in such a way that they can only behave in certain ways. And if it didn't walk away, then the guy who's standing there, making sure everything was cool, the guy who had wrangled crocodiles before, he had a quarter staff, which is a big stick, and he'd put it up under their chin, and they can't really move their chin, their neck, because they don't really have a neck to speak of. So he'd push the stick up under their chin, and they would just walk off. And that's all there was to it. And as long as there was only one crocodile in the area, no problems. And so again, these are like living dinosaurs. This was an amazing experience. The worst part was living in a fish shack with no electricity and no running water and lots of mosquitoes for 2 days with a bunch of other people. That was the hardest part. But the crocodiles, that was the icing on the cake. They're amazing and beautiful animals. And here is a green sea turtle. Sea turtles, again, are highly endangered animals. Almost all species are highly endangered. And that's because there's a lot of ghost nests out there. There's a lot of stuff that they're going to mistake for food, like plastic that they're going to eat. And again, they're air breathers. So if they get stuck in a net, they can hold their breath for a while, but not for that long. And so, again, these are really, really interesting animals. If you think their shell is it's protection, yes, but they definitely can feel. I've worked with a lot of rehab organizations that bring in turtles when they're injured, and if you scrub their back with a brush, like to clean off algae and stuff, they definitely enjoy that, like you would enjoy a back scratch. All right, so here's some anemone fish. These are pink anemone fish. These were both taken in Palau, which is a little island out in the South Pacific. So a lot of people call these clownfish. That's not altogether right. Some of them are clownfish, called the common name clownfish. When it comes to names of things, the scientific name is really the only name that you can depend on. With fish and birds, a lot of times there are now established common names, but a lot of places, region to region, the locals call it something and people call it something else. So you really have to go with the established common name or the scientific name. So these are pink anemone fish. You hear a lot of people, of course, calling them Nemo as well, little kids, and that's fine. But again, when you're trying to communicate with another scientist or citizen scientist or just another person, we all want to be on the same page so we know what we're talking about. And again, we're talking about personification. This fish on the left, he's looking right at me. He's obviously trying to communicate something to me. And then on the right, you have, again, let's talk a little bit about photography. There's different styles. You have the one on the left, which is kind of very forthright, straight ahead, a very standard picture of an anemone fish. And then on the right, you have one that's a little more moody. You've got the shadows from the anemone tentacles on the fish. He's got the side view looking kind of grumpy because of his downturned mouth. So if you're going to get into photography at all, it's all about composition. It's all about having an eye for what is potentially a good shot and then taking as many pictures as you can. The technical end of things, really not that important, particularly these days. You can set your camera on auto or just pick some settings that work for you. That's what I usually do with underwater camera because you can't use the automatic setting because it's in a housing. But I have settings that I generally just leave at one point and then otherwise I don't touch it. And it works well for me. All right, so here is another example of something that most people would probably not see in their life if I hadn't taken a picture of it. This is a Mexican barnacle blenny. He's about the size of your pinky. He lives way, way out 30 hours off Cabo San Lucas in an area called the Socorro Islands. And he lives in a little hole. And I was using a magnifying diopter. So I have a 60 millimeter lens and I have a magnifier that's adds plus 10 to that. So the field of focus is tiny, meaning that I have to have it really sharply in focus to be able to get the camera to shutter. But of course, that's not easy because I'm underwater and there's current and the fish might be moving. But again, so much animation. Blennies are a kind of fish that always look like cartoon characters because they have the little antenna. called cirri. They sometimes are all branched. This guy just has two kind of basic kind of cartoon Martian antennas. And they have eyes that they can move individually. Most fish have fixed eyes on the sides of their heads. They have eyes toward the front that they can move individually like a chameleon. And he looks very ferocious, doesn't he, for something the size of your pinky finger? All right. And you can always, if you don't dive, or if you don't want to invest, or you don't have the money to invest in an underwater camera, these days, even your phone can take great pictures. So you can take stuff topside. I took this off of the boat. This is a bottlenose dolphin, and he was jumping up to kind of meet our gaze. He was interested in what was going on in the boat. And of course, he is an integral part of ocean life. You know, it all works together, as does this great blue heron. Shorebirds are very important to the health and well-being of the waterways as well. And in fact, them dropping their guano in the water feeds the fish, and then they eat the fish. So it's this perfect circle of life, like pretty much everything on the planet, including us. And here are some harbor seals. I actually took this in Harpswell, Maine, which is where I grew up. And again, there are a lot of marine mammals that are endangered and also very important to the health of the oceans. Most of these animals were land animals. Sea lions, seals, whales, dolphins were all land animals and then evolved back into the ocean, probably because their source of food was there. And the reasons that whales are so enormous is because they have all that blubber on them, because they're mammals, but they have to stay warm in the ocean. And even in the warmest ocean, if you stay in it long enough, you're going to get cold, right? So the whale has to have the blubber to keep it warm. And that's why they're so enormous. And if they get stranded on land, they literally will just crush themselves. And so that's another problem with their echolocation is we do a lot of experiments that confuse them and they end up on the beach. And, we just need to, I believe, and again, this is my opinion, I believe that as people, we need to be more conscious of the rest of life on Earth because, again, it is an integral part of who and what we are. I mean, for instance, if the bees their populations continue to go down the way they're going down, there's going to be a lot of stuff that we're no longer going to be able to eat because there's nothing pollinating it. It's that simple. All right, here's a manatee. Manatees are really fascinating marine mammals because they spend all their time in water. They cannot get out of water the way seals and sea lions can. Even though they look quite a bit like seals and sea lions, even walruses that they probably look the most like can get out onto ice floes. But the manatees, very fragile because they spend all of their time in the water. And if the water changes temperature, it's very difficult for them to retain their body heat. All right, so let's look at fish. Schooling fish are amazing. So all fish have something called, it's a separate sense besides the senses we have. It's called the lateral line. And you can kind of see it. It's actually not one of the stripes on the fish, but it's kind of a raised area on the side of on both sides of the fish. Trying to indicate it here with my arrow, but it's not easy to see necessarily. Sometimes you can't see it at all. But that enables fish to feel changes in water pressure. So if you've ever wondered, hey, how do fish school and not bump into each other? Well, first of all, sometimes they do, because some of them aren't as good as others at using their lateral line. But most of the time, they can swim perfectly in unison and not hit each other because they can feel the changes in water pressure. They can also feel which way the current is running, so they know which way food might be coming from, or they feel a predator rushing in at them and are able to avoid it because they have that extra sense. And here's a giant school. So this is what you have to look forward to if you go diving. As a lot of places have changed a lot over the years and have really kind of fallen away from being as beautiful as they once were because we don't care enough about them. But this is Palau. And Palau's way out in the middle of the ocean, and majority of the money that the country makes is through tourism. So it pays them to take care of their reefs and their natural environments. And this is just thousands of fish. And I was just in the school with them. As you can see, they didn't care about me. I was in the school just swimming along. And this for me is like the best time of my life. It's like any stress you've got in your life, you go on a dive trip. Particularly, I run a dive trip to Sea of Cortez, as I mentioned, every year. You're way out in the desert there. There's no cell phones, there's no Wi-Fi, there's nothing. You don't have to deal with anything that you don't want to deal with. I know life has not been easy lately, right? We've all been kind of, there's been some bumps in the road. And this is something that everybody needs is a break. And that is the best kind of break possible, is being underwater with these amazing animals and this amazing scenery, and not having to think about stuff that you don't need to worry about right now. And then there's invertebrates, right? So fish are vertebrates just like us because we have a backbone. Invertebrates do not have a conventional skeleton the way we do. These are spiny brittle stars. They're on a gray moon sponge. This is under the oil rigs off of San Pedro. So we're allowed to go if you have a specific permit, a science boat or even non-science boat. You can go and they drop you off next to the oil rig and you swim under and you go down, and the whole superstructure under there is just covered with life. And these spiny brittle stars, a lot of people think, oh, cold water, they don't have very beautiful animals. They don't have many animals. There's literally millions of these brilliantly colored brittle stars. And then this is off Catalina. Also, California has some of the most amazing different species of nudibranchs. Now, nudibranchs are snails without shells. They're sometimes called sea slugs. They usually can absorb the stinging cells, also called nematocysts, of the things they eat, and are able to use those stinging cells to defend themselves. This is a Santa Barbara genoleus on the right. That is the sea slug or nudibranch, and it's approaching those orange zoanthids. It's going to eat a bunch of those and absorb those nematocysts and use them for defense. And this to me is just like, it's another world, and it's just incredible. This is your East Pacific red octopus, and he looks like he's ready for a fight. So if you go diving in La Jolla, at La Jolla Shores at all in California, you're going to see a lot of these guys. We've got two different species of octopus that we tend to see. These guys tend to come out. Most octopus are nocturnal, but these guys will come out in the day if it's dark enough, overcast enough, visibility is low enough. Octopus, by far, despite the fact that they're mollusks who are related to snails and clams and oysters and other things that you don't think of as particularly intelligent, they are the smartest invertebrate on the planet, bar none. And octopus in particular, also there's squid and cuttlefish and nautilus and things like that. They're not as smart. They're smart, but they're not as smart as an octopus. Octopus is smart. And if it ever comes to the point where we're no longer on this planet for whatever reason, I would hazard a guess that the octopus could evolve enough to take over. Not sure exactly how that would work, but I mean, their skills alone at being able to change their color, their markings, their shape, their texture. I mean, they are amazing hunters and amazing hiders. Well, look at that. That is an animal that's here on this planet. I just took that picture a couple weeks ago in Roatan, Honduras, on a night dive. That is a sculpted slipper lobster. So most of you are familiar with lobsters. This is a very different kind of lobster, sculpted slipper lobster. And it just looks like some kind of crazy alien bug. Of course, it's completely harmless. It's just crawling around doing its thing. But it's just, this planet is amazing. And there's so many people. What we can do is communicate to people how fantastic this planet is and make them care a little bit more about protecting it by showing them just how amazing it is. I mean, some people, maybe they don't get into the sculpted slipper lobster. For me, that's absolutely gorgeous and amazing. And here's some kelp. This is giant kelp. Kelp, of course, is a kind of algae. It's not a plant because it doesn't have a root system. It just attaches itself to the rock with something called a holdfast. And it's one of the most successful algae on the planet. There's only very few places where it'll grow. Tip of South Africa, along the Pacific coast of America, up in New England and across to like Ireland and Scotland. There's some there. So this plant can grow hundreds and hundreds of feet long. It can be the home for thousands and thousands of animals, from the holdfast at the bottom all the way up to the blades at the top. It can grow up to 2 feet a day, 2 feet a day. But it also, the problem is that it needs very specific temperatures of water. And if the temperatures of water go up, it's going to die off. Now, hopefully it'll grow back. But again, that's another problem with climate change. A couple summers back in La Jolla, the water was up to like high 80s. That's unheard of and not healthy for any of the animals or any of the plants or algae. So again, it's a question of, What kind of planet do you want to leave for your children? All right, so let's talk a little bit about photography. It's not always important that you take a picture that is the entire animal. Also, not important that the entire picture is in focus. You want to create a mood. As you can see here, most of the half of this fish is in the dark, and the only thing that's really in focus is his eye. And that's the key to taking pictures of animals, is to try to make sure you get their eye in focus, because again, your eye is looking at their eye. And so that's where the communication occurs. This is a spiny head blenny. So like that Mexican barnacle blenny, another blenny. And what for me, what makes this a good picture is one, he's looking right at us, and two, the way so blennies don't dig a burrow. They find there are tube worms that are invertebrates that live in most oceans, and they create these holes. And then once they die and get eaten, then an animal tends to move in there. And a lot of times it's a blenny. And you can see that his cirri on top of his head, they have little branches. So at any rate, he's in the hole there and he's just waiting for food to come by and he'll rush out and grab it. But what's cool about this picture is the way that the coral radiates out like a star. And it's not all in focus, but it's in focus where it needs to be, which is on his face. All right, so these are some Caribbean neon gobies. So gobies, a lot of gobies clean other fish. Fish have no way to clean themselves, right? I mean, they can't take a bath because they're already in water. So a lot of times they have food stuck in their teeth, or they have parasites on their body, or they have stuff stuck in their gills. And these fish, the bigger fish that wants to be cleaned will come up to this coral head and put its head up in the air to position itself. And these gobies know, okay, he wants to be clean. So they'll go out, they'll literally go in the mouth, in the gills, and basically clean up the fish to its heart's content. And then the fish will go on its way. And a lot of fish will go there multiple times a day. It's like a spa day. They keep coming back over and over again. And there's lots of fish and lots of invertebrates as well that are cleaning animals in pretty much every environment that you will find, but specifically very much so in warm water oceans. All right, this is a fish called a spotted drum. Now, drums are a kind of fish, they're called drums. A lot of times, common names of fish come from fishermen, because, of course, there were fishermen taking fish out of the ocean long before we were going under the water and finding the fish. So these fish have the ability to make kind of a drumming sound by rubbing bones together in their throat. And they do that when they're in distress. And so that's how the fishermen heard the noise. They probably also do that to attract each other, to find each other. What's amazing about this particular species of drum is you see the long filament-like fin on the tail and on the top, which is called the dorsal. So this is a juvenile, very small, probably 3 inches. As they get older, the fin gets shorter and shorter, and eventually it'll have spots on its back, and that's why it's called a spotted drum. So it's just a lot of times you'll see fish and you'll think that's a different fish from this fish. No, it's the same fish. It's just a younger fish who looks completely different. This is a blue spotted jawfish. Jawfish are fascinating fish. They have a burrow as well, but they build it, and they always go down tail first. They're very fussy. This is a male, and he has the black on the bottom. That means he's ready to make some babies. He's trying to entice the females down into the burrow. And when she comes down, because he comes up and kind of flits around and does his fancy dance, then she'll come in, lay the eggs, he'll fertilize them, and then he will guard them. And he doesn't just guard them, but he puts the entire ball of eggs in his mouth. He is a mouth brooder, like there's several fish that do this. He will keep the eggs in his mouth, safely in his mouth, rotate it around so everybody gets plenty of aeration and make sure it stays clean. And he doesn't eat the entire time. And then the fish start to hatch and they swim away and they do their thing. So again, there's lots of ways, lots of interesting ways that fish and other animals in the ocean reproduce. This is taken in La Jolla. This is a shovel-nosed guitarfish. There's lots of really cool fish that are somewhere in between sharks and rays, and this is one of them, the guitarfish. You can see he's completely under the sand, except for his eyes and a little bit of his rostrum and his fins on the side there. So he's an ambush predator. He'll just hang out there until something comes along and he'll just grab it. So we're looking at a little, this is a more photography, black and white. Some things really lend themselves to black and white photography. This is a school of Southern Senate, which are a small kind of barracuda. And then this is back in California. This is a gopher rockfish. Rockfish are related to scorpionfish. We are lucky enough in California to have many, many, many species of beautiful rockfish. And we're finally figuring out that they don't even reproduce until they're well into their 30s, that they can live to be about 200 years old. And so if we're taking them out before they get to breed, that's a problem. This is an eagle ray in Grand Cayman. Now notice that this animal's tail is many, many, many times longer than its body. Why? I don't know. Some scientists might know, but he's just going along, sifting through the sand, looking for food. He was near a wreck that we were diving on. And again, just incredibly beautiful animal. Now we're going to look at some color. All right. So we're back in Palau. This is a yellow masked angelfish. And again, you can see we were talking about angelfish at the beginning. That rock beauty, here's the spine. So you know it's an angelfish and not some other fish similarly shaped. Also notice this cleaning goby over here that's following him along, trying to clean him. And so everything evolves in a certain way for a certain reason. And I ask you, why does this fish color this way? It's one of the most beautiful, dynamic fish I've ever seen. And there's a reason that it's patterned and colored that way. It somehow helps it to do its thing and stay alive and evolve. But I don't know, it's just amazing to look at. All right, and here's another really pretty fish. This is the state fish of California. For those of you in California, this is the state marine fish. We also have a freshwater fish. And this is a juvenile Garibaldi. That's our marine state fish. And this is the adult, which is the largest species of damselfish in the world. It can get up to about 3.5, 4 feet, and it's very, very protective of its territory, especially when it's guarding eggs. And it will attack things much larger than itself, which it doesn't really have teeth, but it will attack divers if they get too close to its area. And that's why it's bright orange, because it doesn't care about being camouflaged. It just will attack. I mean, it's simple as that, because it's an aggressive fish, as are all damselfish. All right, this is a scrawled cowfish. This is off West Palm Beach, Florida. So boxfish are really amazing. They're one of the few fish that have a completely modified skeleton from what is a typical skeleton with a vertebrae and ribs. They have hexagonal plates that form literally a box, and the skin is over the box, and the only thing that they can move is their lips, their eyes, their fins, and their tail. The rest of it is just a box. And there's a bunch of different kinds of boxfish, and it makes them a little awkward. Are we running out of time?
Yeah, so Jonathan, if you'd like to wrap up your talk in 5, I can give you a few more time. There's only 2 questions, so
Okay.
you can finish
All right.
whatever you have
I'm
to say
getting
in
toward the
5,
end.
and then we'll
So,
do a quick
all
couple
right,
of
cool. So again, boxfish. And this is a tree fish, which is another kind of rockfish. And you can see, again, amazingly dynamic colors, even in cold water. And this is another spiny brittle star. I mean, look at the colors. I really make an effort to not increase the color values at all. I just adjust the exposure a little bit and a few things like that. That is a true color. And here is a jellyfish up in Nia Bay, Washington, which is across from Vancouver Island, very far northwest corner of Washington State. Narcomedusa, very small jelly. And here's some pairs. A lot of animals mate for life. These are some moray eels, jewel moray eel, some dot and dash butterfly fish. And here's my favorite odd couple. So quick story, and then we'll wrap up. I was diving in the Sea of Cortez, and there was a very, very, very strong current. We almost had to abort the dive. We were just hanging on to for our dear life on a ledge there. And I saw these two, and they obviously tucked in because they just wanted shelter. And it was probably where the moray eel hangs out, but the balloonfish went in there with him. So it's very much an odd couple, and I really was very pleased to be able to get that picture. Oops, wrong way, excuse me. Oh, and there we are. So again, I finished with a picture of a person. This is a little girl who was snorkeling in the Philippines. And so it's up to us. It really is up to us. And again, something that you can do every day, whatever it is, picking up trash, do it. And again, my name is Jonathan Levan. There's my website. You can contact me through my website. Please do if you have any questions about anything, photography, scuba diving, etc. Jonathan Levan on Instagram. And thank you for listening. And whoever has a question, I'd be happy to try to answer it.
All right, so Jonathan, here's the first. It's how do you recommend funding your camera and equipment if you have limited finances? What are some advice you have?
Okay, so a lot of people start with a GoPro. So they have an underwater housing, they're very small camera. You can get them for probably about $300. You can certainly go, a lot of people buy them and then don't use them. You know, that happens a lot with underwater gear. You just either you don't have the time or you suddenly don't have interest. So if you go to eBay or any of those places, you can probably find a really good, fairly new model of the GoPro or any underwater video camera that can also take snaps as well, or you can do video grabs or whatever. And that's a good place to start to see if it's something you really want to get into. And it's a way to record your dives so you can go back later. A lot of us that do citizen science, we do fish population surveys, and so that's another good way to help to protect the planet by providing scientists with information about fish populations. And if you are videotaping it, then you're absolutely certain of what fish you're putting down and how many you saw, et cetera. So I hope that answers your question. Just waiting for our mediator to come back. Moderator. Oh, have another question there.
Yes, Jonathan, the last one is, does the photography team, do they travel often for photos, and where do you usually travel to?
Um, so I'm freelance, so I work with a lot of different organizations. Sometimes I work with people repeatedly. It just really depends on what comes up. I mean, obviously, there hasn't been a lot of travel lately. I was in La Paz, Mexico toward the end of 2020, and then I took 21 pretty much off for travel just because of the state of the world, and I was also moving from California back to Maine for a while. Um, I mean, you can. It really depends on whether you're working for a specific organization. I worked for the Reef Environmental Education Foundation for quite a while and was doing stuff specifically for them. But now I just find something that is interesting to me, or someone contacts me about something. And it's taken a long time. And I've been taking diving since the early 80s and taking pictures for almost 15 years. And, you know, for a while, it was just kind of like something I did in addition to what was then my real job. And fortunately, I just kept making connections. It's all about making connections with people. And it's also about not necessarily always getting paid right away. During the pandemic, I was working with this dive boat. I was trying to get people to come on the dive boat because I really wanted this charter boat to being able to keep in business. And so what has ended up happening is that I ended up writing a weekly column for their email blast. And I was able to advertise trips that I'm running on their email blast, and it's often very hard to get people to commit to dive trips, and I've managed to do that because of that relationship. So in the end, it makes me money because if I get enough people, I get to go on the trip for free. That saves me money right there. So again, I'm sure we're out of time now. Feel
Yes.
free, anybody else, if you want to contact me about being involved in ecology and the environment without actually having a degree or underwater photography or anything to do with nature, I'm happy to answer your questions. And I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here.
Right, thank you, everybody. We'll see you in the next session if you care to join our additional sessions. Thank you again, Jonathan. That was really excellent, really informative. Hopefully, you guys got a lot of really good information on that. Thank you again.